They beat her and beat her and beat her until they killed my granddaughter.
Who thinks that their mom's gonna kill them?
The city doesn't take responsibility for the kids.
They just found the easy way out, and the easy way out cost a lot of kids their life.
We learn from every single instance here.
When a child is telling you something, you gotta listen.
Hello, I'm Annika Pergament. Thank you for joining us. The Administration for Children's Services is the agency charged with protecting and promoting the safety and well-being of New York City's children. It investigates allegations of abuse and neglect. It provides support for families often impacted by issues such as poverty and mental health challenges. And in the worst-case scenario, it probes the death of a child. We begin in Brooklyn. It was one of the most horrific crimes this city has seen. 3 children, Zachary, age 7, Liliana, 3, and Oliver, just 3 months old, drowned in the middle of the night in the cold waters off Coney Island. Not in an accident, but allegedly at the hands of their mother, Erin Murdy.
I know that it must have been terrifying for him because I just know that he was afraid of the water.
When Zachary was born, his parents had already separated. Soon after, his father, Derek Murdy, who was in the Navy, was deployed to Japan. When he returned home to Norfolk, Virginia 3 years later, he filed for divorce.
We didn't work out because we were just 2 kids who were not mature enough to have a mature relationship.
Daddy, look at that.
He also filed for custody of Zachary, his only child. At first, Erin resisted, but changed her mind. In a text message, she wrote that she was finally considering giving up custody.
I'm thinking of letting Zach live with you and possibly give up my rights.
They had a court date scheduled for November, less than 2 months after Zachary's death.
I'm Zachary's dad.
I know that boy. I know he probably just did it. He probably just did it. He didn't question it, most likely. Because who thinks that their mom's gonna kill him? I don't know.
What is known is that Erin Murdy was struggling. The adventurous woman Derek met while playing video games had spiraled. Court documents show she hadn't paid rent on her Neptune Avenue apartment in more than a year and had been served with an eviction notice. Some speculated she was suffering postpartum depression. Murdy's lawyer would not comment on the case. Zachary's football coach said she rarely watched his games and always seemed to be in a rush.
Looking back on it, I'll definitely be more attentive to how fast she was moving, never feeling settled, very just like, quick, coming and going. You know, that was alarming.
But could Zachary, Liliana, and Oliver have been saved? Had any red flags been raised about the safety of the siblings? ACS, the Administration for Children's Services, would not tell us. All they will say is that they're investigating and retraining. Jess Danhauser is the ACS commissioner.
We have retrained staff on certain aspects of the work, including postpartum psychosis.
But in New York State, it is the law that there be a public accounting of what led up to a child's death.
Those responsible for protecting our children and people like Alyssa will do that job and do that job better than they've done before.
The law, known as Elisa's Law, was signed by then-Governor Pataki in 1996 after a public outcry over the death of 6-year-old Elisa Izquierdo. She was killed by her mother after years of torture and abuse, even though child welfare authorities had been called numerous times by teachers, neighbors, and relatives, many of whom stood beside the governor as he signed the new law. Elisa's Law sought to make investigators accountable. It dialed back confidentiality laws in child abuse cases and mandated public disclosure of what led up to the death of an abused child. And while the law ultimately gives the commissioner discretion to decide whether releasing that information is in the public interest, ACS has repeatedly denied our requests for specific details on child fatalities. Attorney Jeffrey Binder worked for Senator Roy Goodman, who sponsored the bill.
The intent was to make government more accountable, to make it easier to audit what happened, and therefore to improve government functioning with regard to this area. And ultimately, it's supposed to protect kids.
In the early years after the law passed, ACS did become transparent. In 2006, after the torturous death of 7-year-old Nix-Mary Brown, a child with an active case, then Commissioner John Mattingly held a press conference.
There are standards of practice that need to be met in protective investigations in order to avoid, as much as possible, these kinds of tragedies. And these standards were not met in this case.
Mattingly announced he was disciplining caseworkers and supervisors, suspending some without pay. He shook up his leadership team and called for an ACS ombudsman. He even asked the Department of Investigation to probe what went wrong. But in multiple cases in recent years, ACS has not informed the public of potential mistakes and has increasingly limited access to records. Current ACS Commissioner Jess Danhauser defends this change.
I don't believe that discussing the details of individual families' lives are the best way to drive system change. When it's important, when the public needs to know, if we get something terribly wrong, I will make sure that they know.
But even if you get something right, isn't sunlight and transparency always a better route than secrecy?
And we believe we're providing that.
The city doesn't take responsibility for the kids.
Marcia Lowry is an expert in child welfare law. She says this kind of secrecy potentially leads to worse outcomes for children because sealing reports of maltreatment hinders efforts to reform and improve the system.
You can't do anything if a child has been, heaven forbid, killed or seriously maltreated. You can't undo that, but what you can do is learn from it. And what you can do is try to keep that from happening again. That's not really what I see happening in New York.
This is his role.
Derek Murdy says he'd had no idea his son Zachary had so many cases with the Child Welfare Agency
One of the last pictures we took together.
Until after his death.
But yeah, my boy. The day that I got the call that he had, when he passed, when I went to Coney Island, the doctor was like talking. He was just like, oh man, five open cases. I was like, 5 open cases? He started talking about it. I was like, are you serious? He's like, yeah.
And the confusion over who was accountable or responsible for Zachary's case didn't end when he died. 2 days after his death, Child Protective Services sent Derek a letter notifying him of an allegation of abuse or maltreatment, presumably referring to Zachary's drowning. The caseworker writes that when the investigation concludes, Derek will receive a letter telling him whether CPS decided the report is indicated or unfounded. Again, Zachary had already died when this was written.
It's coming close.
You think that the city of New York shares in the blame for what happened?
Hell yeah, I do. They were not doing their proper due diligence. I do believe that New York, they definitely play a part of it. They have a part of accountability. They do.
ACS says it has made progress in strengthening the agency, from more training and coaching for staff, better investigation protocols, and more advanced technology. Stay with us. We'll have more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Annika Pergament. In recent years, ACS has focused on providing families with support and services so that children who are at risk can remain at home. Studies overwhelmingly show that long-term, children who stay with family have better outcomes than those raised in foster care. But deciding where a child should live is a delicate balance.
my granddaughter. She was such a good girl, I tell you.
Yolanda Davis will never forget when detectives knocked on her door to inform her that her 7-year-old granddaughter, Julicia Batties, had been found dead in the Bronx apartment where she'd been living with her mother and siblings.
They beat her and beat her and beat her until they killed my granddaughter. I'm thinking that the detectives and them coming to tell me they have to bring her back to me. Instead, they come to tell me my granddaughter expired. That didn't make no sense because she was loved here. Emails I sent to my lawyer.
Davis had been fighting for the better part of a year to get Julicia back after the Administration for Children's Services had decided that Julicia should live with her mother, Nevasia Jones, who, along with Julicia's half-brother, is now charged with her murder. That recommendation from the city agency was made over the objections of her grandmother, her court-appointed lawyer, and Julicia herself. ACS would not comment on this recommendation. Davis knew Julicia was terrified of her mother. Jones had lost custody of Julicia at birth due to alleged abuse and neglect of her 4 other children. Child welfare officials placed Julicia in the care of Davis, her paternal grandmother, who would spend the next 7 years fighting to protect her. Despite Julicia's fear of her mother, the agency insisted that it was important for her to have supervised visits.
We would get to the agency and she would go into a corner and she would be crying, I would be crying, and I'm saying, y'all don't see this? I mean, does this says something to you guys? This is like a red flag to me. And she was like, oh, I know, but she has to see her mom and blah, blah, blah.
Over time, Julicia was also forced to go on court-permitted weekend visits to her mother's apartment.
Grandma, you called the police?
What am I calling the police for?
Because I don't want to go with Mommy.
Why you don't want to go with Mommy?
Oh my God. I don't want to go with Mommy.
That was one conversation Davis said she recorded with Julicia. In January 2020, a therapist who worked with Julicia wrote, Julicia presents discomfort when the subject of mom is being introduced. But in March of 2020, ACS sent Julicia to live with her mother, and then in June, it made that decision permanent. Davis recorded a phone conversation, she says, was with an ACS caseworker who revealed the likely reason for the decision.
They probably want to close this case. You can't close it. The child is scared to death of her.
It's my baby. It's my twin.
Julicia's father, Julius Batties, never had custody of his daughter. Julicia's mother had filed a number of domestic abuse cases against him. And while none was ever substantiated, and he has no criminal record, the allegations kept him from spending a significant amount of time with Julicia. He blames ACS for sending her to live with her mother, despite the red flags.
They didn't care. They knew what danger she was in because I was letting them know too. And they seen a lot of things for themselves as workers, but they brushed it under the rug. They didn't care to do nothing about it. Everything is more easy to brush it under the rug than to present it and handle it. So they found the easy way out. And the easy way out cost a lot of kids their life.
Julicia's death, a little more than a year after moving in with her mother, illustrates the broader challenge of protecting vulnerable children in New York City. The tension over whether to reunite abused children with parents who appear to be making progress, and caseworkers under pressure to close cases. Attorney Derek Sell says too often the most at-risk children get the least protection.
Their duty is to protect children.
Sells is suing the city at ACS on behalf of another victim, 4-year-old Jace Eubanks, who died a month after Julicia. The medical examiner's office ruled the cause of death was battered child syndrome. His mother's boyfriend, Jeremiah Johnson, is charged with his murder. In response to our request for comment, the city law department said in part that the case is under review. Sell says ACS ignored obvious signs of abuse.
Time after time, when a child dies as a result of the city's failure to protect them, and you have investigations that take place and say, oh, this is why the child died, that is why the child died, and then nobody takes those recommendations and puts them into place, you have repeated instances of children being abused, not being taken out of the home, not being protected, and increasing the likelihood that they will be killed.
In 2018, the city passed a law mandating an annual report on child fatalities. It includes data on children known to ACS because of past or current cases with the agency. In 2020, the most recent available report, it shows that about 60% of child fatalities alleging maltreatment were tied to families known to ACS. Jess Danhauser is the ACS commissioner.
We go and put out a document that describes everything that we've learned, everything that we did, things that we didn't do, and what our actions are.
But the reports have no details about what went wrong or where the agency may have failed. The latest report suggests strengthening engagement of fathers and supporting staff in navigating the mental health system. We asked what its review revealed in Jace's and Julicia's cases. Experts say disclosing what happens in these cases is one way to ensure it doesn't happen again.
When will we know what happened? When will we know, did anything change after those cases?
We've done a lot to change from those cases, from every investigation that we do, from all of the support that we provide families. We're expanding our coaching during active cases. So we look at the highest risk cases and have an expert coach work with our staff to make sure that they're getting the guidance that they need in addition to their supervision.
She was so happy with Grandma.
That is cold comfort to Yolanda Davis.
She trusted me. And I feel that I failed her in a way because I tried everything. I did everything I could because I told them, Julicia told them, and they were not listening. So when a child is telling you something, you gotta listen.
ACS wants to stress that the work they do is not easy. They tell us they are trying to assess human behavior and determine the best way to protect children and support families. More when we come back. Welcome back. Protecting at-risk children is a complex task. The summer of 2021 in New York highlighted the urgency for a stronger safety net and the devastating consequences when that safety net fails.
The short time span from mid-August to mid-September 2021 was a particularly grim chapter for at-risk children in New York City. Julicia Batties, Legacy Beauford, Asen Gonzalez, Jace Eubanks. All four killed.
All separate cases, but the failure was the same. That is the common thread, the fact that at-risk children are not being protected. And you had 4 failures in a 4-week period that allowed for these children to die.
Attorney Derek Sells is suing the city for what he says are systemic failures to protect children living in abusive homes.
In response to our request for comment, the city law department said in part that the case is under review.
Back in 2016, after the death of 3-year-old Jaden Jordan, who had been fatally beaten, the Department of Investigation, which is the city's watchdog, probed how the city had failed this little boy.
And they recommended that there be better training and that there be more efficient management of these cases. The city failed to implement additional training. They failed to implement the recommendations that had been made.
DOI found that the depths of errors was so significant and the errors involved the overall implementation of policies so basic that they go to the heart of ACS's core mission of protecting children and implicate high-level systemic problems. DOI made 9 specific recommendations, including making referrals to the NYPD, audits, and case practice reviews. The ACS commissioner says the agency implemented all but one of the recommendations.
And the one that was not implemented was the one that said there should be more transparency for the benefit of public information. So why would ACS choose not to follow the recommendations of the Department of Investigation?
We have an internal monitor that tracks all of our recommendations that come in from anywhere, whether it's Department of Investigation, whether it's advocates that we're engaged with, to make sure that we are delivering on what we commit to.
But DOI is not an advocacy group. It is the city's Inspector General, an independent law enforcement agency empowered by the city charter to investigate city government. Its recommendations are derived from robust investigations. The DOI disclosure recommendation supported existing New York State law, ELISA's law, which sought to dial back confidentiality in child fatality cases.
Unless someone really cares and ensures that these laws, policies, regulations are properly implemented and are handled by people who are trained to implement them, then we will continue to read about children being killed.
Across the Hudson River, the state of child welfare in New Jersey is a very different story. In the past 20 years, it has transformed from being one of the country's most overburdened and mismanaged to what many now consider a national model. The change was mandated by a federal judge after a class action lawsuit claimed the system was so dysfunctional that children were routinely abused, neglected, and occasionally even killed. The settlement in that case required specific reforms, enforceable in federal court, and ongoing oversight by a monitor. Now, New Jersey is poised to formally exit court supervision sometime this spring. Child welfare law expert Marcia Lowry was the lead attorney in the original case.
They have put in all kinds of safeguards. They monitor kids' cases. They take responsibility for kids' cases. I don't remember a bad maltreatment case in New Jersey since when we started that lawsuit, and that system has turned around dramatically. So that is a very, very good system.
But now the system is run by Christine Beyer, Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Children and Families.
Reform can only get you so far, and when you continue to reform in a current structure or a current system, you know, you're doing the same things, you're tweaking it and doing it a little differently, but basically you're going to get the same results. And so that's why when we talk about transformation, it's really thinking about how do we do the work differently.
A host of factors have contributed to the turnaround, including investing hundreds of millions of dollars to hire and train staff, launching a data collection system, and increasing services to families in need. And while it's impossible to make a direct comparison, there are a number of similarities, starting with population size. New York City has 8.4 million residents. The state of New Jersey has 9.2 million. And there are noteworthy differences in outcomes for children. One key metric is repeat maltreatment. In New Jersey, those cases have fallen sharply. New York's data have not followed the same trajectory.
I think what's going on in New Jersey, I congratulate them, that is excellent work. We learn from everyone we possibly can, whether it's New Jersey or all around the country. I'm proud that our maltreatment numbers are also headed in the right direction.
It's really challenging to be able to say why one system performs better than another. I do think that in New Jersey, we're very deliberate in our recruitment and hiring and our training.
New Jersey caseworkers are also paid more. On average, starting pay after the trainee phase is $78,000. That's about 40% more than in New York City. And supervisors make about 37% more, averaging more than $113,000. Some say the data prove that New York can and should do better.
I've dealt with lots of child welfare systems around the country. New York City is a very insular system. It is very, very hard to get New York City to change.
But as New Jersey has shown, change is possible and crucial.
I just know that it's the worst thing that ever happened.
It's devastating. No young child should ever have to go through that.
She was a good kid. Y'all listen to her. She had just a quiet, humble voice. And y'all listen to her. Y'all listen to her cry. And y'all did nothing.
ACS says it has made many improvements over the past several years and that its accountability office monitors the recommendations made from the fatality review process to ensure that the agency is implementing them across the board. I'm Annika Pergament. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.